away from solutions.
I think it's polarizing too.
Yes.
Because what ends up happening, they talk a lot in the article about forcing in quotes,
right,
someone to question their perception.
Right.
And then they say bad. And they don't go into any more information in that.
Don't do that.
That's good. I want my perceptions to be questioned. I want to constantly be questioning my perceptions. Anyway, that's my take.
No, I think there's a lot of truth to this, guys. And again, I know I rant about it, but if you're out there and you've identified with this term and this term felt healing for you to have a word to call this, I know what you're going through, and I realize the desire to use that word. And if you were my patient, I certainly wouldn't beat you up for using that word. But you'd notice that I subtly start replacing that word with real words, and I start replacing the things you're identifying with real language that really does effectively capture what's happening in a more generous, spirited way that leans towards solutions. And you'd notice that in our sessions, I never use that term, unless I'm quoting you. So as a therapist, when I hear this article and NBC's like broadcasting this like they discovered the gospel, it's bothersome to me. It's too authoritative. They're wrong, and it doesn't have any bearing in science. So it's problematic. I just don't think it's going to get you towards solutions.
Yeah. All right, well, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we have some listener mail about verbal abuse. You're listening to Pod Therapy.
Do you hate ads in podcasts? So do we. That's why there aren't any in Pod Therapy. But eventually, we'd like to fill this ad space with short messages from real listeners who help sponsor the show. So start thinking about what message you'd want here. Maybe we can read it for you, or maybe you can leave a voicemail and we'll just play that. Either way, Pod Therapy wants to be listener-driven, listener-supported show, and we hope you'll think about filling this space with a personal message for our audience. Thanks for listening. We're back. You're listening to Pod Therapy. Our first listener mail comes to us from Crystal, who writes in about verbal abuse. Hi, Nick and Jim. As you said in an earlier podcast, we've got to keep you motivated. So your podcast would be much better if you answered my question. Good job, Crystal.
I like that.
I suppose my question has many layers, and you may have heard it from my other favorite podcast, Matt and Mattingly's Ice Cream Social. Nice. That's our favorite podcast, too. Besides this one.
No, it's still mine.
I have really tried to use and think about the things you've said about building confidence, but I feel my issues stem from verbal abuse that my dad put me through as a teenager. My dad put a lot of pressure on me to lose weight. He would weigh me every week, and he'd bribe me with things I needed or wanted, and if I didn't lose what he wanted, then he'd yell at me for what felt like hours, while tears streamed down my face. FYI, if you couldn't guess, this gave me depression. Surprisingly, my high school actually caught that I was depressed, and when I took a paper questionnaire about how I felt handed out randomly in class one day, Children's Aid was called and counseling was provided, but it would only get him to back off a bit, and when I took an interest, he would start pushing again. So, not only would it erode my confidence, but also my self-worth. Then I went away to work at Walt Disney World. My dad said that he wouldn't let me come back to live with him if I didn't lose substantial amounts of weight. That didn't happen, and when it came time to come home, he said he'd pick me up from the airport, but that I couldn't live with him. That was about 10 years ago. After that, I didn't speak with him for 6 months until he spoke to me only because he was getting remarried, so this whole weight situation was never settled with him. Since then, I suppose I've gained more weight and tried to get over the verbal abuse my dad subjected me to. But I've been in and out to see a variety of different therapists and counselors, more free due to me living in Canada, yay. I feel going into my 30s, I have become more confident, but still find it hard, especially since I've finally scored my first official full-time job. And I'm still in my trial period, and I'm struggling a little to meet expectations, which is stressing me out, which makes me feel like my throat is closing up. I also feel insecure around my dad, and I really don't know if it makes sense to even bring it up after all of this time, as well as my dad is dealing with his father succumbing to dementia, which is hard for both of us. I feel like I've been able to let go of most of the blame for the way he treated me, but I also feel like regardless of all the work I've put in, it all hurts and is still somewhere beneath the surface. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this and any suggestions that you have. Crystal.
Wow. Well, thanks, Crystal, for writing in.
Yeah.
First off, that's terrible. I'm sorry you had to go through that. That can be very frustrating, very difficult to go through. Yeah. So I think, as far as my feedback with that, whether or not to approach this with your father, my take on this, and again, with Jim having the background with families, I'm interested to hear kind of his take on this, but I'm always a big fan of addressing it within yourself first, finding your own peace, working on your own issues, and you coming to terms with this and you having peace with this first before working on it with him and dealing with that in that kind of dynamic and trying to repair the relationship. My reasoning behind that is because just for me personally, I like to have the solution on my side of the court. I want to have control of the solution. I want to have influence over me getting better. I don't want to put me getting better into the hands of someone else. And that would be my fears if you were to address this with him right now when you haven't really fully addressed it within yourself. I would be afraid that you would be going into that with the expectation that I will feel better when he does X, Y, and Z. When he apologizes, then that's going to be my road to healing. That makes me nervous because I wouldn't want to see you put your road to healing in the hands of him apologizing because he just may not be at that point. He may not see anything that he did wrong. And plus, with what he's going through with his father, it just may not be something he's ready to deal with. So I applaud you for getting involved in therapy.
Yeah.
And I guess another thing that I'm kind of hearing you talk about too is how this has affected various areas of your life. And I see this with a lot of people I've worked with too, where because of abuse that they've gone through, because of some of this trauma that they've experienced, it affects how they perceive situations they're currently in. So in your specific example of just getting your first full-time job, still being in that trial period, yeah, your perceptions, you may be, overly critical of yourself just because you grew up in that environment where you were constantly being criticized.
Yeah, I think that there's A, that, and B, I guess I want to say a couple of things on this. The first is to Crystal and also to the wider audience. So I'm currently above the weight that I know I should be at. I probably need to drop about, if I'm honest, probably about 40 pounds to get to what the internet says would be the right BMI. And I just want the internet to be wrong. It's funny, I came back from a doctor's appointment once, and my wife's like, hey, did you ask the doctor, about your weight? And I was like, yeah, my BMI is off. And she goes, oh, yeah, what did he say? And I said, he says I'm too short. So need to get taller. Then it won't be a problem.
Cognitive reframing.
That's right. That. Yeah. The problem isn't the weight. The problem is I need to just add a couple inches to the top and I'll be great. So just wear some high heels. But, to this point of how weight works, and this is something that I want everybody to think about for a second. On this show, we talk a lot about addiction, and we talk about alcoholism, drug addiction, and we're going to talk about that later in the show too. And we talk about how we can develop these unhealthy patterns or obsessive and compulsive ways of living. One of the areas of our lives that I think scoots underneath the radar is our dependence and our emotional connection to food. And that seems so simple, and it seems like a dumb thing. Like, oh, come on, Jim, talk about the heavy stuff. Talk about the stuff you learn about in grad school. I get that. But this is going to be the area that affects most of our health. Heart disease is killing us. Diabetes is killing us. There's cancers that are killing us that are routed to what we're eating. And guys, I am the chief offender. I have nothing to brag about. Trust me. At this table, Nick is the healthy one. But I'll tell you that I've been really reflecting lately on my own emotional connection to food and in how I will try to self-medicate with it. And we have another episode called Emotional Eating where we talk about this. But, Crystal, when I look at your story and I see so much sadness and I see so much brokenness and I see so much being beat up on, ironically, for weight, the great irony is that you're going to tend to reinforce the negative as you self-medicate and self-placate and treat yourself so that you can overcome this. So if you're out there and you notice that you really struggle with weight and diets are being failed, you've tried to lose weight and you've been unsuccessful and, you can't stick with it, and you tend to go back into patterns that you wish you wouldn't and that you've resolved not to, what's interesting about that, Nick, is that you're checking most of the boxes for addiction right there. That's almost all the 4 C's or 5 C's. The craving cycle is there, the continuous use, the chronic use despite consequences, the inability to cut back. It's all there. So, friends, I would challenge you to do what I'm doing, which is to begin a food journal and start asking yourself, what do I eat and when do I eat it and what was going on in my life? And start to punctuate, when did I eat, why did I eat, and what was I feeling? Because that's the thing we forget to take a look at. But the stomach is the second mind. And it really has a lot to do with how I'm feeling and what I'm living whenever I make my food choices. And, I'm not taking a shot at you. I'm just saying you clearly describe a history of trauma and verbal abuse and emotional pain and simultaneously a struggle with weight. And I don't think those are two different things. I think those things live together.
I would agree. I mean, because there's a lot of people that becomes the number one coping skill.
Yes.
It's that comfort food, right? Food it's such a big part of our culture. It gets associated with everything that we do. And it kind of reminds us of simpler times. If I can go back and eat mom's spaghetti, it reminds me of that time and I feel comfortable again. So it's easy to retreat back to that. As far as myself and for, actually, I mean, I'm one of those weird people where because of my genetics or whatever, my issue was always gaining weight.
Oh, okay.
So that's what was really weird is I can relate a little bit in the sense of having pressure to change weight.
Okay.
Because I had more pressure to gain weight if I was going to be an athlete.
Okay.
Come on, you gotta work out, you gotta eat healthy, you've got to
Okay.
And I've had that from a couple people in my life, but the ironic thing is that once they just completely stopped, then I started doing it.
Right.
Because it has to be something that's motivated internally. It's got to be something that you choose to do, and you got to get over that hump. I've now been pretty active in lifting weights and eating healthy. I'm coming up on a year now of doing this.
It's been consistent. Yeah.
And there was that part where it was a change, where it was like, I'm doing this and it's something that's different, but then now I feel like I don't think about it anymore because now it's just how I live. This is just what I do.
Right.
It's no longer something I'm actively trying to do. This is what I do.
This
is me.
second nature. Right? And that's whenever you see the biggest gains, I think.
Yeah. But I think going back to this, so I guess what I'm hearing you say, Jim, is that we've got to work on healthy coping. If this is something that you're going to work through, finding replacement coping skills, finding just being aware of how food was part of the coping. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
I think that the one thing that I would challenge that I see all the time on TV is right around in December we talk about New Year's, right? And everybody starts getting those New Year's resolutions and you start seeing the gym commercials like crazy. I believe the two places that you lose weight are in the kitchen. I think it's more about what you're putting in, not necessarily what you're sweating out, but also in the therapist's office. And a lot of people don't add that dimension. Weight loss is more a mental game than anything else. The thing that stops you from losing weight or the thing that causes you to put on more weight is not your muscle mass. It's your mind. It's the most important muscle in your body. So I think that that's a big part of this. And when I hear Crystal talking about pursuing some therapeutic options, I believe that is a huge moment. And I really want to congratulate and push forward on that. But Nick, I also want to have a word with the dad. If you're out there and you're a parent, I'm a parent. I hear the story, and there's a part of me that even though this father is wrong, and what he did is not okay. It is neglect. It is abandonment. It is hurtful. It is not helpful, and it's really close to the word abusive. I get what a parent is thinking because they're thinking, I'm not going to reward unhealthy behavior. If we replaced weight with alcohol, if he was saying you're a drunk, you overdrink, you drink all the time, I don't like being in your presence knowing that this is part of you, and you are not welcome in my home until I see substantial change in your behavior pattern that no longer indicates drinking, we would probably be taking a different approach right now. We'd be saying, hey, good job, Dad. Way to not enable, way to draw the boundary, way to do that. And I can see where some people would make the argument, why is weight any different, Nick? Because weight's going to kill this person too, just like the alcohol, and there's an addiction cycle there, and their dad's drawing the line. I want to speak to that because I realize as a parent that there's a desire to do good work here. And this is going to be a complicated thing, but if you are a parent and you're trying to address your child's weakness or an area that you would like them to improve, and you're doing that with removal of yourself, neglect,